Hello and welcome to the first episode of GDP, Gross Domestic Provocation, a show where we'll chat about economic topics in everyday language. I'm Jeremy Hudson and I'm based in the wonderful state of New Jersey in the US. I have a background in marketing, in the tech industry, and also worked as an equity research analyst in what seems like a lifetime ago. What does it have to do with economics, I hear you asking? Well, I did go to the London School of Economics, so I'm not totally clueless. But I'm mainly here to make sure that my two more esteemed co-hosts don't get too technical on us and keep things at a level that I and everybody else can follow. And maybe for a bit of comic relief too. Anyway, enough rambling from me. I'm delighted to introduce you to one of my co-hosts, my friend, former colleague, and top economist, Dan Altman.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I have to say, I don't know if anybody dreams of moving to New Jersey, but it's not a bad place to live.
Speak for yourself, Dan.
Yeah. Okay. What's your lifelong dream? You made it all the way here from London. Amazing.
That's right.
Well, anyway, yes, I'm an economist. I've got a PhD stamped on my face, and I've done a bunch of different jobs in economics and government, academics, consulting, media, tech. And I'm really pleased to be here with somebody who complements my knowledge much more with their own, and that's Jason. So I'll hand it over to you, Jason.
But before we introduce Jason, I think Dan is like playing down some of his qualifications here. He has, I think, no less than 3 economic degrees from Harvard and also worked at, I think, the New York Times, The Economist, worked for Premier League teams in England. Anything else you forgot to mention, Dan?
British government, taught at the NYU Stern School of Business, Foreign Policy Magazine. I don't know. Do those make any difference? Probably not.
To me, they do. Anyway, thanks, Dan. And to complete the triumvirate, please welcome my longtime friend. We met probably at the LSE pub, I guess, for the first time many, many moons ago, and a hedge fund trader extraordinaire, Jason Freeman.
Don't know how to, thanks, guys. Thanks, Jeremy. I don't know how to follow up. Like, that feel quite intimidating now. I'm sure many of my old colleagues would say extraordinaire. They might say weather beaten and cynical, but you know. Swings and roundabouts. So I did meet Jeremy at LSE. We have been great friends since then. A circle of us have always kind of worked in finance. I had the misfortune or fortune to spend a lot of the last 20 years of my career working in the buy side, which we refer to as hedge funds in London. I haven't managed to escape it to New Jersey. Haven't earned enough money to, like Jeremy, to make it to that esteemed part of the US. But yes, the other side of the Atlantic, I'm still in London and glad to join you guys today.
Jason, mate, it's not like you to be shy as well. For the record, Jason has worked at places like Goldman Sachs, Citadel, just to name a few.
So the topic for today is going to be the government shutdown in the US. So the first question is, what exactly is a government shutdown? Dan?
Well, when the Congress fails to pass a bill for certain types of spending, those types of spending simply can't go on. There's no law that appropriates the money for it. So there are some types of spending, like mandatory spending, which is mandatory under previous laws, and spending that is necessary for national security or safety. Those continue no matter what. But all the other spending has to be passed in a law that continues. In fact, it can be called a continuing resolution, and then signed by the president. But the Congress has not been able to agree. And in this case, it's because the Republican Party wants to gut certain parts of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which allowed people to buy health insurance on public marketplaces. And the Democrats don't want to let that happen. And if you can't get 60 votes in the Senate, then you can't pass a bill. And because the Senate is so evenly divided, neither side can get 60 votes. So it's still stuck in the Congress. We don't know for how long. The negotiations are currently at a standstill. So let's just sit back and enjoy this nonsense.
So how important is a government shutdown? What are the actual economic effects here?
That's a great question. It's certainly important to up to 800,000 federal employees who might be furloughed. It's important to all the businesses that have contracts with the government and might be going into their next payment cycle without having any receivables paid. So there are some people who are feeling it very acutely. In terms of the economy as a whole, it's interesting to look back at some previous shutdowns. They do seem to have some effects. Some economists say, well, they just postpone growth until people are ready to get going again. But I actually looked in some detail for my high yield economics newsletter at the 2013 shutdown, which was also about Obamacare. And I found that there were higher claims for unemployment insurance, quite a lot higher during that shutdown, and that didn't include the furloughed federal workers. There was much less of an increase in the value of stocks. Stocks went up much more quickly in the period after the shutdown than during the shutdown. And if you look at household spending adjusted for inflation, it also grew much more quickly in the month after the shutdown than the month of the shutdown. So, yeah, I mean, I think it does have some economic effects, but the big effect right now is just prolonging this ridiculous uncertainty that we've had since almost day one of this administration, with new economic policies coming out every week and just all these things that basically paralyze any company that's trying to do some forward planning for hiring or investment.
Sounds like a bit of a shit show. Jason, what do you think?
Well done. I was going to ask, and I guess none of the prior shutdowns, as far as I can remember, last that long. I think the longest one was under Trump 1.0. That's 35 days, was it?
That's correct. Yeah, the one in 2013 over Obamacare was only 16, 17 days, depending on how you measure it, but it still had some effects.
Yeah. So obviously, I come at this from more of a market's point of view. So it's always made a big deal out of in terms of financial markets and impacts. It's another discussion point. But as you said, as you kind of rightly pointed out, there's not really much of an impact. And I think if you look at like what's happened to the stock markets, and when did we shut down officially? Was it Monday or Tuesday?
Wednesday.
The stock market in the US has rallied since then anyway. So it's not necessarily indicative of an impact on stocks. But I did read that like under Trump 1.0, the impact was somewhere in the region of like $25 billion of GDP impact. I think it was a kind of guesstimate number, but then that's not maybe significant in the whole grand scheme when your GDP is like 30 trillion, right? But then, yeah, it's still going to have some impact, right?
Yeah, and I think that right now the economy is so fragile that you don't want to be, as some people have already said, the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so, it might be only 25 billion, it might be more, depending on how long this shutdown lasts. But we already have a labor market that's pretty stagnant. We already have a lot of uncertainty and paralysis. This is just one more thing. And, I see the phrase banana republic being increasingly bandied about. And when people start to have doubts about whether the government can even fund itself and looking forward, they don't see anything getting better and a whole bunch of other stuff that we could also discuss, it's getting, as some of my old Argentine friends would say, kind of bananero.
Argentine friends, which you guys are really bailing out to the tune of 20 billion already, I read. So, but
Yeah, we could just take the money and give it to them instead if we can't spend it here, right?
and they'll use the money to go and buy soybeans from China. So it's all swings and roundabouts. So, I mean, one interesting impact I think this time around in terms of why it's different from the other times, and that's one caveat as to the discussion that we're having, is that it's actually coming at kind of critical time in terms of, as Dan already pointed out, where the economy is quite fragile. There's been a lot of uncertainty already, but then also we have a lot of critical data releases that are coming up, and we've just started a Fed cutting cycle. So today or Friday of the 3rd of October was meant to be non-farm payrolls. It's the biggest, for those who are not too read up on this, it's the biggest kind of economic data point in the US that comes out every month. It's just the Bureau of Labor's unemployment figures. That's meant to be released on Friday. That's been delayed because specifically of the shutdown. The Fed obviously look at CPI and PPI, which is consumer price indexes and producer price indexes, to actually get a measure of inflation. They have preferred measures of inflation, which is something slightly different, but it's also another big number. And like this will have some consequences if this shutdown goes on for quite some time, in terms of the Fed will be essentially flying blind into this cutting cycle.
So just so I'm clear, so critical like statistics like non-farm payrolls and other things are being delayed because of the shutdown. Is that because there aren't enough people to produce the numbers, or like how does that work?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
actually, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is essentially shut down right now, and it is responsible for both the jobs report, which is called the Employment Situation Report, that includes the non-farm payrolls number, and the Consumer Price Index and Producer Price Index releases as well. Some people don't realize they do the prices and inflation as well. So right now, there is one employee at the Bureau of Labor Statistics who's able to continue working. He's the deputy commissioner who has been acting commissioner essentially since our president fired the commissioner for virtually no cause. And so is he really going to be able to put all those releases out by himself? I kind of doubt it. I've actually read this morning that some of the data were already ready to be released, including for the jobs report, and it was just up to the executive branch to decide whether they would release it. But most people think that this will be another really lousy jobs report, and we know how the White House feels about those.
Wait, are you saying that they actually have the data and they're using this as an excuse not to release it because it doesn't look good?
Well, you would like to release it when the staff is in place and they can do all the usual things. I don't know if they were expecting someone just to email out some headline numbers or what, but apparently the data, for the most part, are ready to go.
But there is a private report which comes out, which has already come out, which comes out on the Wednesday before every non-farm payrolls, called the ADP. So it's not recently, and Dan will know this better than I do, it's not recently been a reliable predictor of the actual official report, but it's already showed weakness in the labour market that's obviously been a continuing trend the last few months. So there is that, but then it's not necessarily as accurate as the BLS does. But the thing is, the current situation that the White House is in, even though, I mean, if the jobs report is bad, Trump is and the White House are very good at talking about it being Biden's economy and Biden's job report. Realistically, they want to put pressure on the Fed to cut rates as quickly and as sharply as possible, and a really, really bad jobs report will do that. So maybe from that respect of it, they won't necessarily delay the report. What they might want to delay is the inflation reports, because the inflation reports may start to show signs of inflationary impacts from tariffs, and those are coming out in the next few weeks. And that's the only thing that can really stop the Fed from engaging in a very aggressive cutting cycle. But Dan will probably have some more thoughts on this.
To be clear, there are no inflation releases coming out before the Fed's next meeting, which is in less than 2 weeks. So it'll be after that we see the effects. I think that the tariffs are already showing up in inflation numbers. If we look over the last 3 months, annualized inflation in both of the major readings, the Consumer Price Index and the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, are about 3.5% at an annual rate, which is almost double the Fed's target of 2%. So we're seeing it. It's coming from various sources, but including tariffs. And the Fed officials have been calling out tariffs for that for several months now. But then if we look at the jobs report, I mean, that ADP report, ADP is a big payrolls provider in the United States, and it puts out its own data. That showed a drop of 32,000 jobs in payrolls for September. We have some other private data. There are new data from Revelio Labs, which is another labor market analysis firm. They show an increase of 60,000 jobs. Both of those are kind of paltry numbers under any normal circumstances. But the huge irony here to me is that when this administration gets a bad jobs report, it just makes the case for lowering interest rates, which is supposedly what they want. And yet, when the bad jobs report came out for the first time, they fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And now they might be suppressing another bad jobs report. So what do you really want here? They want to have it both ways, it seems. They want to have jobs reports that say the economy is booming and have lower interest rates. But anybody who knows the first thing about monetary policy would say those two things don't usually go together.
Was that the trigger, the actual that bad jobs report, in terms of that for getting rid of the former head of the BLS? But then I think Trump's obviously and the White House currently have quite a momentum to try and get rid of elected officials in places like Lisa Cook at the Fed. So it's not the first time they basically targeted elected officials behind like bureau in terms of the Fed or bureaucrats.
Well, there was a report that showed that most of the job growth that had been reported, including the current administration, was incorrect or at least had been overestimated. And so there was a big adjustment to the numbers. especially applying to the months of May and June. So that they use that to discredit the department, even though it's always had revisions like that from year to year. And they fired the commissioner, but they have been talking down the reports that have shown a really weak labor market ever since, when it seems like those reports are actually making the case for them for lower interest rates. And you know what? The guy that they initially nominated to take over at the BLS, a guy named E.J. Antoni, had essentially been gaslighting with all the posts he put out from his job at the Heritage Foundation, saying that this economy was doing amazingly well, home run after home run for this administration, which went directly against the narrative of these reports, even though these reports did support the idea of lower interest rates. So that guy's candidacy, by the way, has gone by the wayside because of some things he posted about differential intelligence between men and women and some other homophobic
You are
remarks.
kidding.
So, we don't have to worry about him so much anymore. But I just don't understand what the White House is getting at, trying to have its cake and eat it too.
Well, that sounds like that chap might have a new interview at the head of the FBI soon, or he'll get promoted. I think I totally agree with you, Dan. But the thing is, I think that like Trump and the White House have two audiences, right? They have the MAGA base, the American public, which they need to kind of reiterate that nothing, everything that goes well in the economy is responsible is a result of their actual great work. Everything that goes badly is probably a result of Biden. But then that's a different audience from the Fed. So the Fed are just not going to act on Trump's tweets or the White House ramblings. I think that's why they can basically get away with actually saying saying one thing and doing another.
That's a clever point. Yeah.
Got it. So so far, the conversation's been very US centric, of course, but I'd love to know what's the global context here, Jason?
Yes, I think lots of people within financial markets, especially post this century, have always talked about debt dynamics. So if you look at the beginning of 2000, for example, the UK, our debt to GDP, which is basically government debt as a share of your overall GDP, was 37%. At the beginning this year, it was 103%. The US has gone from 54% all the way up to 120%. So you've had momentum going on the last 2 decades where the debt burden for developed economies is getting worse and worse and worse. I think what's happening is that the fear when we had GFC, that it was a deflationary crisis. What's happened since COVID is that so much money has been pumped into the global money supply by Western governments and by governments globally in general, is that we have now an potential inflationary crisis. It's a very different crisis from GFC because people are sat at home spending money, direct checks into their bank accounts and the rest. So that's basically embedded level inflation globally that we haven't seen for quite some time. And that's led to interest rates globally being high. Now, clearly, banks are in a cutting cycle now because economies are slowing down quite drastically on various measures. But realistically, in terms of the longer term debt that governments are paying on their interest, it's a lot higher than it has been the last two decades on average.
Yeah, that I think is really the key point, that even though we see central banks like the Fed cutting short-term interest rates, long-term interest rates are not coming down as quickly. And those are the ones that really matter to people in terms of mortgages, car payments, credit card rates. If you're a business, the cost of capital for investment, these are things that depend on long-term rates. If those don't come down, it's going to be a lot harder to juice economic activity. And also, when you ask yourself, well, why aren't they coming down? It's these worries about inflation and the debt, which is pulling so much credit out of the long-term end of these markets. And they're really connected because the only ways to reduce these debts are to raise taxes, which nobody seems to want to do, to cut spending, which nobody seems to want to do, or to cause a lot of inflation, which would devalue your currency so that those old debts just don't seem to be worth as much anymore. And that may be the direction we're heading. But if we head that direction, then we're also going to destroy the savings of millions of people because those dollars won't be worth as much anymore either.
Oh, well, wait a minute. Let's talk a bit more about that. And would love to know more on how this would affect the daily lives of our listeners.
Well, the best way to describe this in terms of not getting too technical is just to use a real world example. So in the statistics I shared earlier, in 2000, USA's debt GDP was 54%. It's now in the region of 120%. Turkey, back in 2000, debt GDP was 51%. Turkey's debt GDP now is only 26%. Now, So what magic have they conjured to achieve that? Well, what they've done is essentially inflate away the debt. It's similar to what Dan just talked about. So they've had a kind of non-independent central bank, inflation out of control. There's been a lot of faith in lack of faith in the financial system over there, and they've massively devalued their currency. So if you look at what on the ground for local Turkish people, the value of their savings, the value of their assets in lira have just been massively eroded over the last 2 decades. And they have inflated away the value of their debt. So that's why you see a massive reduction in their debt, half since 2000. But that's not a healthy situation for a lot of Turkish actual consumers on the ground.
Yeah, and if you're in the United States and you think, oh, that's Turkey, that certainly couldn't happen here. Well, take a look around. I mean, the dollar has dropped about 15% of its value against major currencies since this administration took over. It's already happening. And that's because of policy uncertainty. And as you just said about Turkey, lack of faith in the financial system. People are starting to wonder.
Well, the similarities haven't ended there, really. I suppose is an authoritarian leader who regularly insults his central banker.
Yeah, pass me the hummus. I mean, give me the kebab, please.
I guess if you're looking at a baseball analogy, we're probably, if you're looking at how far along the US is along to that Turkey model, I mean, you're definitely past first place.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, baseball or some other analogies that have been used for that. But, it's definitely true. And also, people who say that couldn't happen here just maybe don't have a long enough memory. I may be revealing how old I am, but the first bank account that I got, which came with a little paper account book from a little local bank in Connecticut, paid an interest rate of 13% on my savings. So, we've been there before. We've had crazy inflation and high interest rates, and this administration seems hell-bent on getting us there again.
Yes, I think the only era, I mean, we obviously had the ERM crisis in the UK, and that was in obviously 1992. So I can't remember where interest rates peaked at. Was it double digits, maybe 12 to 14%? But I had no money as a child, so I didn't know.
I can't say there was much in my account either. It was more just to teach me about the importance of saving and all that.
My Midland Bank Grippers savings account probably had about like £50. So, but yes, it's a dangerous precedent. So there's a lot of kind of people within markets now are, looking at where the potential path of where all this leads to. I actually think the Fed should hike. They shouldn't actually be cutting.
Wow, he said it. He said it.
Yes.
Trump is putting so much pressure on that guy to cut it, though, right? Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, the kind of cynical aspect of it is that you're talking about someone who's notorious for not paying his debts and not paying his creditors, right? So,
you mean he has history?
Yeah. So you could argue that the easy way out is inflating the debt away. I mean, if you go back to the Turkey situation, I mean, I imagine the elites in Turkey are not really haven't necessarily massively suffered in terms of the last 2 decades in terms of their ability to get their money offshore. They probably have global investments everywhere. If you go to Istanbul itself, everything's priced in dollars and euros. So they're to a degree insulated from the problems that the inflationary bubble in terms of devaluing the debt has actually had. So maybe the back of the White House's mind that's something that they might want to do in terms of the debt burden. It's really far out there as a probability, but it's not impossible.
Sure. I mean, if you think about the assets that might hedge this kind of inflation, you just have to look at the president's family and their assets. They have a lot of real estate. They have an increasing interest in cryptocurrency. I don't know if they're holding any gold or precious metals, but they certainly have 2 out of 3 in spades.
Well, yeah. Well, I heard something along the lines that they're looking at investing in some sort of Australian mining venture, which would imply that number 3 is already being pretty much tied up.
I'll follow the smart money, right?
All right, let me try and summarize this so far then in terms of what it means for the, our listeners. So, in the short term, there might be fewer government services available, maybe some job losses, and maybe longer term interest rates could go up. We'll have to pay more on our mortgages, car payments, credit cards, and also our savings will be worth nothing. Did I get that right?
Yeah, more or less. But,
Amazing.
I like Jason's point that this shutdown's really a symptom of not growing pains, but sort of shrinking pains for budgets all around the world, right? I mean, we have to get out of this situation somehow, these debts that we've accumulated over the years, and we're just going to see more and more of these crises of governability And those sort of spill over into crises of confidence in the financial system and where the private sector can go in this country and others.
Yeah, so I think you're going to definitely see a lot more flashpoints in Europe, especially in France, because that's kind of the focus in financial markets at the moment in terms of their debt to GDP being like 120%. They have quite generous social welfare benefits in France in terms of retirement age. These things were sacrosanct in terms of French public opinion, in terms of actually raising retirement age. And I think it's somewhere like sort of mid 50s. And they talk a discussion in terms of actually for them then to fiscally save money is raising it more in line with the US and the UK up into the 60s. But that's causing huge trepidation in France. And you're probably starting to see already protests against this because it's another form of austerity, which is similar to what the UK and a lot of European developed economies have gone through since 2008. So this is again, as Dan pointed out, it's been a kind of cut consistently since 2008. So this is just the latest kind of epoch of it. So yeah, it's going to be interesting politically and domestically here and the US and Europe.
Yeah, and don't forget about the other countries that are running debt to GDP ratios over 100%. We've got Spain, Italy, Japan, even Canada, though Canada has more financial assets to offset that. But there's just a potential for a rash of devaluations going through these major economies. And I wrote several weeks ago that it could put the Asian crisis of 1997-98 and Russian crisis to shame if we see big devaluations, but in much bigger economies. So there's lots of stuff to look forward to. Let's get out the popcorn and enjoy.
Halloween, Christmas, Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
What's a time scale for our countdown here?
Yeah, we'll see. Holiday spending with no spending. We'll see how that works.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's a definitely potentially a very unique crisis in the sense that you would normally say that these developed economies, in terms of their government bonds and their debt, are like perceived as safe havens in financial markets. But given their debt to GDP not say out of control, but reaching those levels in terms of where we are at over 100%, no one's going to lend to people by public markets if they think they have zero ability to pay those bills back, or if they're becoming a worse and worse creditor over time. So it's actually a very interesting and challenging times in terms of the actual use of fiat currency. So I think that worry has been reflected in a few assets that you see in the financial markets, like precious metals and golds, and to a degree, cryptocurrencies as well. So it's definitely a potential sea change that may, depending on how people react to different situations, that we'll see happening in the next 6 to 12 months.
Got it. So time to wrap up, I think. Dan, any last words of wisdom?
I think Jason put it really well. We're just sitting and watching as we see a gradual deterioration of these financial benchmarks, and that will have effects on consumers as they will have to pay higher interest rates in the future, and there are risks to their savings as well.
Jason?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a wall of worry to climb pretty soon for a lot of people. Thank you. Take care, guys.
Bye.
See you next time.